Similarly, I've had a fascination with meal events in the scriptures. A few years ago at my previous church in Sherwood Park, we devoted an entire teaching series to the meal passages, if you will, in the scriptures. There's a whole bunch of Bible stories that take place at tables. Now, the first one being the most obvious one that we'll participate in here this morning is the Lord's table, the Last Supper. We'll get to that in just a little bit. There's another really good one in Matthew 9. That's a dinner party that Jesus attends at the home of Matthew, the tax collector. And this particular meal disgusts some of the religious leaders, the Pharisees, because Jesus is seen eating and drinking with the people that they all consider the worst of the worst in the community, like the dregs of society. There's an obscure one. If you want to look this one up, there's an obscure one in 2 Samuel that's interesting. It's a complex story that involves more than one meal, actually. It's an Old Testament example of a king engaging people on the margins. We taught this series at Sherwood Park. One of the ways we tried to apply the teaching every week was to challenge people to consider their own literal tables. And the challenge was to try to get somebody at your table that you'd never had at your table before. To make one meal every week a unique kingdom experience. And it was while we were talking about that series that a group of us were in a meeting and we were planning the weekend services. And I don't know what caused somebody to do this, but they pulled out their phone, they went online, and they searched on the Guinness World Records site, and they learned that there's a world record for largest potluck. At the time, the Guinness World Record for the largest potluck was held by Chandler Christian Church in Chandler, Arizona. They set it in April 2014 with 1,275 people. And my immediate reaction when I heard that was, oh, we can beat that. So we started playing with that idea, and a few minutes later, we did it. We actually did it. We set a Guinness World Record as a church. Now, there was a bunch of requirements involved. We had to recruit 50 stewards who could not be from our church. So we got the mayor to be a steward, as well as several county councilors, some other elected officials, because the stewards had to do a systematic verification of each participant bringing a dish that was large enough to be shared with 6 other people, and they all had to stay for a minimum amount of time. There's a bunch of work going into this, but when it was over, we crushed Chandler Christian Church. Guinness verified the results and declared Sherwood Park Alliance Church the world record holder for largest potluck with 1,558 participants. Not bad, huh? And we held on to that record for about 5 months. That's when a group in India crushed us. They set a new world record for largest potluck with 3,264 people, a record that still stands today. So it was fun while it lasted. It was fun. We had a very unique community building experience. We involved some of the neighboring businesses in this whole thing. There's a Sobeys grocery store across the parking lot from us. And so when it was over, we kind of had some new goodwill with them. And we gathered up 30 crates of food weighing over 1,300 pounds that all went to the local food bank. Now, none of that has anything to do with our text. It's just a good story. And I'm kind of thin on content today, so I thought I'd tell you. Anyway, I want to look at this meal text this morning from John chapter 2. The setting is a wedding feast. It's a dinner party from John's gospel. And again, what we're about to read is the story of Jesus' first miracle, Jesus turning water into wine at Cana. It's a miracle where Jesus demonstrates his power, where Jesus meets a need. A family is about to suffer embarrassment because the wine is running out. And as we read the story, keep this in mind. As much as this is a text where Jesus' power and willingness to meet human needs is on display, ultimately, again, this is a text about joy. And it might not be obvious right away. So here we go. This is John 2, starting at verse 1. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw out some and take it to the master of the banquet." And they did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and he said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink, but you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. It's a cool story, isn't it? This wedding feast is nothing like the wedding feasts and celebrations that we're used to. Most modern weddings have two parts, the ceremony and then the reception that takes place around tables. Wedding feasts in Jesus' day are like 20x that. For some of the attendees, certainly for the bride and groom, this is the biggest party of their lives. Ancient Jewish weddings are like regional festivals lasting up to 7 days. Literally, an entire region can be invited. The kind of event which really only happens a couple times a year in a small community. My wife and I got married on New Year's Eve, 1987, and we didn't have a lot of money. Neither did our parents, and we knew that most people have things to do on New Year's Eve, and so our wedding and our reception was super short. The ceremony was at 6, I think, and the reception was held in the room right next to the sanctuary of the church. And there were just some pocket doors that opened up there, and everybody just kind of moved from a room like this into that side room. And we served bagels and cream cheese and deli meats and wedding cake and coffee and punch. We were all out of there by 8:30. I'm telling you, it was like 2.5 hours start to finish. What's described here in John 2 is the complete opposite of that. Huge crowds, big entertainment, lavish meals over the course of several days. At least that's the plan. But 4 or 5 days in, there's a problem. The wine is just about gone. Like there's a carafe or two sitting over here, but there's lots of people still there. Somebody has made a mistake, a serious miscalculation. To run out of wine at a dinner party like this is an absolute disaster. And here's why. It's more than a minor breach of etiquette. Wine is the joy of the feast. There's ancient rabbinical statements about this. The wine is the joy of the feast. If you don't have wine at a wedding dinner, if you don't have good wine, then the feast isn't a feast. The rabbinical statement is, where there is no wine, there is no joy. This is the grandest celebration of some people's lives, a big day for a whole region. And because of the wine problem, it looks like it's going to be a disaster. To run out of wine is a huge embarrassment. It represents the absence of joy. It's a bad way for this young couple to start their new lives together. So it makes sense for Mary to suggest that Jesus do something. Hey, Jesus, have you heard? They've run out of wine. What are they going to do? And that's when Jesus turns to his mother and makes one of those cryptic, odd statements he sometimes makes. "Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come." Not mom, but woman. Woman, what do you want from me? My hour has not yet arrived. That's weird. At least, what's he doing? Now, in several places in the book of John, the word hour is a reference to Jesus' death. This happens in John 12, 13, and 17. Jesus often speaks of his time or his hour as the moment of his death. So step back and think about the big picture here. It seems like a strange way for Jesus to respond to his mom. Mary says they're running out of wine. This is going to be terrible for them, a total disaster. And Jesus responds by saying, "I'm not ready to die yet." "Woman, why are you dragging me into this? Don't you know I'm not ready to die?" Now, depending on the commentator that you're checking this out with or the teacher, there's multiple ways to make sense of this odd statement. I tend to favor one that I first heard from Tim Keller. Keller describes Jesus, speculating a little bit, of course, as being sort of lost in thought. He's lost in thought. Let me explain it this way. Jesus is at the party physically. He's experiencing the festivities like everybody else. He's eating and drinking. He's enjoying the party. But while it's happening in his head, there's a whole other thing happening. What I'm trying to get across right now could be happening, probably is happening in the room right now. You are here physically. You're in church. You're looking at me, but you might even be hearing my words, but you could be lost in your mind, in thought. You might be thinking about something completely different, about chicken nuggets or a nap or golf or whatever. I'm perfectly aware that you could be drifting off even while it looks like you're looking right at me. I'm not suggesting that Jesus is distracted. Rather, think of it like this. His mind is on something bigger than the party. His mind is on his mission, on his purpose. He's deeply stirred. He sees what's going on at the party. The wine is running out, joy not being present. And when his mother urges him to do something, her request suddenly becomes a metaphor for his whole life on earth. Jesus sees the disaster that's about to happen. And again, don't underestimate how big a disaster this is. This is catastrophic for the hosts of the party. They're about to be humiliated. The party is not going to deliver on its promise. That's the issue. The party is not going to live up to expectation. So here it is. Here's the principle right here. Joy, which the wine represents, always runs out on the parties we throw. Joy always runs out on the party we throw. In other words, we constantly look for happiness and joy in things that can't ultimately bring it. Joy is the summum bonum, the Latin word for highest good. It's what we all live for, yet given the state of our world, it feels like this kind of joy is scarce. I just turned 60 a couple of weeks ago, which means a lot of things. One of them being, I've lived long enough to learn about some things I never considered when I was younger. And among the things I've learned is, every single one of us wants joy, a kind of satisfaction, a fulfillment, but it's super elusive. Honestly, I'm not even sure it can be found in this world. Some of us thought we'd find that highest joy through the love of another person. Others looked for it in professional accomplishment. Others thought joy would be found in stuff. A cottage, a cabin, a better home, or a second home, or toys, or travel. We pursue these things, and sometimes when we get them, we think, wow, this is the best. But these things never fully deliver. The desires fade, the feelings fade, the stuff breaks or wears out. And buzz just isn't what it used to be. And then you realize that you don't really have that joy you've been seeking, that highest good. I think almost everyone, if they live long enough, comes to a defining moment when they realize they're not experiencing joy. And when they realize that they don't have joy, they usually do one of three things. This is a classic argument, by the way. They blame the stuff or the things. They decide the reason that they're not happy and fulfilled is they need new things or new stuff, a new house, a new spouse, a new mate, or they need a new job or a new career or a new therapist or hair plugs or something, right? A lot of people rip through relationships and jobs and toys. They do this because they're blaming their things for their discontent. They can't possibly imagine that the problem might be them. Or maybe they do put the blame on themselves. They believe the reason for their lack of joy is their poor performance or their poor choices. So they beat themselves up and then they try harder, which leads to self-doubt and self-disgust and self-hate. Some people, they blame themselves. And some people, when they realize they don't have joy, they just kind of blame the universe, which is easy to do because this comes as a huge price. I'm talking about the person now who says, when I was young and idealistic, I used to think about joy and fulfillment, but I'm old enough to realize that basically life is hard and then you die. That's that real cynical. kind of approach to life. The pessimist, the one who doesn't think lasting joy is possible. This is the person who kills that part of themselves that is what makes them truly human. Or there's another way. You can blame things, you can blame yourself or the universe for your lack of joy, or you can try the Jesus way. And my sense is that maybe some of you need to hear this morning. This could actually be a game changer right here. If you lack that certain joy, you can blame it on separation from God, which is different from blaming stuff or yourself or the universe. Your lack of joy could be coming from a failure to establish or to nurture an authentic relationship with Jesus. C.S. Lewis, back in the 1940s, did talks on the radio, on the BBC. And in one of his talks, he said, this is so awesome, listen carefully. Creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exist. A baby feels hunger. There's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. There's such a thing as water. Men and women feel sexual desire. There's such a thing as sex. If I find within myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the only probable explanation is I was made for something in another world. If I find within myself a desire which no experience in the world can satisfy, the only probable explanation is I was made for something in another world. That's perfect. If you and I have a deep desire for something and all our attempts to fulfill that desire leaves us wanting more, it may be that earthly experiences were never meant to satisfy it. Every person I know is longing for joy, that elusive highest good. We understand what it feels like to lack joy, but Jesus is the supplier of joy. When Jesus decides to make wine at Cana, he's saying, yes, there's a joy shortage, but I'm the solution for it. Something you may need to overcome is the perception that Christianity, the way of Jesus, is anti-joy. So many people think the essence of Christianity is being good, going to church and serving, do all this and escape hell. I mean, that's not super appealing like that, right? Think about this. When Jesus decides to make his public debut, when he chooses to do his first miracle, what does he choose to do? We know the answer. You just heard it, but think it through. If you're Jesus and you're going to start to reveal who you are, you're going to do your first miracle, you'd want to really do something to show people who you are and what you're about. You want to show the essence of who you are. So what will Jesus do? You'd think, heal someone, raise someone from the dead, show his glory by feeding 5,000 people. Those all seem like great options. They all reveal who he really is. But Jesus' first miracle is creating 100 gallons of 100-point wine at a dinner party. And if you find that a little bit weird or unsettling, you might not know what he's all about. Jesus is sending a message. I'm the joy of the feast. I've come to bring festival joy. This is what I'm about. This is who I am and what I've come to do. Bring joy. Wherever I go, all creation sings with joy. Wherever I am, there has to be joy. The essence of me, who I am, is joy. So if you're here this morning and you're wavering in your faith, maybe you haven't even committed your life to Jesus yet, it might be because you perceive that if you do so, you're signing up for something that's restrictive and boring and narrow that hopefully will ending up in heaven for eternity. If that's what you think Christianity is all about, you don't understand it because Jesus is the bringer of joy. He's the Lord of the feast. If you do any kind of digging on this text, virtually all, at least in my collection, all the commentators see a link between Jesus and this miracle at Cana to something the Bible speaks of multiple times. The wedding feast of the Lamb, the last day, the day when God's original intent is fully realized. When the scriptures speak of the end of time, the restoration of all things, the description is of a meal. The marriage supper of the Lamb, the greatest table ever. This is from Revelation 19, the culmination of the biblical narrative. Then I heard what sounded like a great multitude, like the roar of rushing waters, and like loud peals of thunder, shouting, Hallelujah! For our Lord God Almighty reigns. Let us rejoice and be glad and give him glory, for the wedding feast of the Lamb has come. Verse 9 goes on to say, Blessed are those who are invited to the wedding supper of the Lamb. The scriptures begin with God placing Adam and Eve in a lush garden and giving them a first command. The first command is, eat freely. And the scriptures end with a description of a feast to end all feasts. And this is your invitation to be part of that feast, where you will feel how that bride and groom felt at that wedding in Cana. This is what Jesus is saying in John 2. The way to joy, the way to your real identity, is to come to me, to unite with me by faith. That's the key to inner joy in this life. And it also happens to include an invitation to a grand wedding feast that will last forever. This is what Jesus says is available through him. I'm the Lord of the feast, he says. Now, I've been riffing here for quite a while on one verse, verse 4, where Jesus says that odd thing to his mom. Okay, that's all we've done so far. Trust me, I'm not going to go on that much longer. Anyway, that moment where it looks like he's lost in thought, or better put, when he sees the whole picture that nobody else sees. He knows the only way to the wedding banquet of the Lamb will happen is if he pays for it. Jesus is at that wedding banquet in Cana when all around him people are eating and laughing and singing. They're clinking their glasses to make the bride and groom kiss and all of that stuff. And Jesus is sitting there thinking about how the only way that he can invite the whole world to his wedding feast is through his hour. The only way for people to sip the great cup of joy is if he pours himself out. And this is why I think Jesus says to his mother, Woman, my time has not yet come. He's deadly serious. He's watching people sipping joy, but as he sits there, he's beginning to sip sorrow because he sees and knows what nobody else sees and knows. Multiple times in the New Testament, wine is contrasted with blood. When Jesus makes wine in the purification jars, he's saying the only way you will ever have great wine for the great feast is if my blood is shed for the purification of all. The way we enter in to his joy is through his sorrow. And we can't forget about that part. That's the gospel. Well, there's just one more thing to talk about, and that's the process by which we learn more about his joy, how we experience his joy. Let's go to verse 5 and reflect on something that Mary says there. After Jesus speaks those cryptic words to her about his time not being yet, and he calls her woman, Mary's reaction is interesting. She doesn't snap back at him. She doesn't, react with sarcasm. Well, excuse me for thinking you might want to help this family out and give them a source of wine. Instead, I love this. She turns to the servants and says, do whatever he tells you. That's fascinating. I'm not sure Mary understands what Jesus means when he says, my hour is not yet come. I also don't think she thinks he's crazy. Jesus says a lot of odd things. And Jesus' words and actions confuse people all the time, including his family. But I do think by the time this takes place, Mary has learned that if Jesus says or does or asks for something, the best idea is to repeat it, act on it, or just basically do whatever he says, even when what he asks is counterintuitive. The best idea is just simply to follow. Mary doesn't understand what he's talking about, but she's unwavering. Do whatever he says. Stick with him. He's our only hope. And I hope that's what this text is saying to you as well. To stick with Jesus means to recognize the various types of wines you're sipping are likely to give out. The thing you're running after isn't likely to satisfy you. It's not going to bring you the joy that you think it will. Your tremendous need for intimacy isn't going to be satisfied by sex and marriage. It'll only be met by something beyond this world. Your tremendous need for identity is not going to be satisfied by a degree, a promotion, or a title. It'll only be met by something beyond this world. Your tremendous need for happiness isn't going to be satisfied by a home, a trip, a retirement account, or even the Oilers winning another Stanley Cup. It'll be satisfied by Jesus. In Jesus is where you find festival joy. He's the Lord of the feast. He's prepared a seat at the table for you, and on the table is the wine that you've been searching for your whole life. Don't let anything come between you and it. Do whatever he says. Follow him, trust him, stick with him. The best wine is reserved for you if you take him up on his invitation. I want to close with this passage from Isaiah 25. This is from the prophet where he says, "On the mountain of the Lord Almighty, prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and the finest of all wines. He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. He will remove his people's disgrace from all the earth." The Lord has spoken.